to week 2 of Shine in 2016. And by now, you're probably starting to realize that everything that you do in your life is in partnership with yourself. So last week, we talked with Diana Steele, the global TV nutritionist, and she was sharing a lot of information that you were probably already implementing about just making those right choices for you and your body so that you ride that urge curve, as she talked it, and make the right choices for you. As we move through this series, you're going to find more and more ways that you can partner better with you, with yourself, with your body. And we'll move into the ways that that will show up differently for you in your partnerships at work, at home, with your family, and with your friends. So today, I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Leslie Ellis to our session. And she will talk a little bit about how you can have more focus in your life, be more aware of your body, and really take it to that next level so you're checking in and being able to be fully aligned with yourself. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Leslie Ellis. Again, she is a registered clinical counselor. She's also on the board for the Adler Association, the Adler School. And Leslie, welcome to the studio this morning. It's early.
Yeah, it's morning.
Welcome.
Hi. I'm actually an adjunct faculty with Adler University, and I'm really happy to be here. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Well, can you tell me a little bit about what brought you to this specialization in focusing?
So I was originally introduced about, I'm dating myself, maybe 25 years ago. And it was through a friend who, she had a very difficult history of trauma. And she had tried many things. But she found that this was the key to her her recovering from quite a tough start, and she said it was a lifesaver for her. So I found out about it through her, and then what made me pursue it, I suppose, is that it really kind of fits with my personal philosophy. It's very gentle and yet very deep, and really puts the the authority in the person. So as a therapist, I have found, I believe that people really have their own answers inside them, and they know a lot more about themselves and their lives than I do. And this is a way for them to access that, without me being the one who really is the authority. And it's really astounded me as I work this way with clients, how amazing the processes that can come from it. It's always very creative and surprising and empowering. And yeah, surprising is probably the biggest word. I just am really I'm amazed at where it takes people. So I've been mostly inspired by doing it, experiencing it, watching people use it.
I can feel that actually too right now.
Yeah.
And I just realizing, and with that, how does that apply then with energy? So if we have more focus, that we will have more, good energy.
Yeah, it's kind of a funny name. It's called focusing, which you would assume would be about specifically kind of the laser beam focusing, but it's actually not. But it does bring you energy, I think, by really helping you become more in touch with yourself and aligned with what your authentic sense of purpose might be. I think a lot of people are externally driven, or maybe are pursuing goals that they think are a good idea, or that their parents might have directed them to, or their ideas about what they should be doing. And when you're doing something that doesn't align with your own inner purpose, I think you lose energy for it. And that's your body's way of saying, maybe you're on the wrong track, or maybe this isn't quite right. But when you find what's really true for you and right for you, then I think your energy just naturally will really increase. And so I think it's a way of really aligning it with your true purpose.
Yeah, it's kind of, being in spirit, I think. Sometimes I see that with myself or with clients, just that sense of when I really feel connected with what I'm doing. And of course, that's got to start with the body, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's really how we tell how we feel about something authentically. I think, a lot of people that come to see me are, they would describe themselves as being basically living from the head up. And there is a whole very important, huge amount of information that we are always taking in our body that's much more focusing. The founder of Focusing, Eugene Genlin, would say that the information we get from our body and through our body is actually much more intricate and much more nuanced than what we would get if we just think about it. But it does take a little time. And so if you're in a hurry, you might assume that what you're thinking about something or what you feel about it. But, so a lot of people maybe don't bother to take the time to really check in. But when they do, they find something, that's a lot more interesting, I think, than what your immediate thoughts of things would be.
Yeah, and I think these days there's so much bombardment from like so many stresses around and things that need to be done for not only ourselves but also people that we meet. And so, there's a real rise in anxiety and depression actually. And so in our culture, I think this
Yeah.
tool or these ideas are really going to help ground us. Can you speak to that? Why do you think there is such a rise? What's your version of that?
Well, I think you've alluded to it. Actually, I believe, and this is something I've read in many places. I think Dr. Peter Levine talks about that in his books. Waking the Tiger is a good one, but he basically says our nervous system isn't designed for the level of activity and speed at which we are leading our lives. So we're bombarded with information, we're bombarded with activity, and I think we're really designed for a much slower existence. And so our nervous systems never really settle. And we're also not, we're not facing sort of mortal danger. We face more perceived danger, and that is the definition of anxiety. Really, is fear in the face of really no danger. And so, I just see a lot of people creating stresses in their own head. So we might, worry and ruminate, and then our bodies will respond as if there's something really dangerous out there, when actually it's not. And our nervous system doesn't know how to settle when it's kind of this constant low grade buzz all the time. And so it's really I think affects our bodies in a not good way. Yeah.
Yeah, and just even as I'm thinking about that as you're talking, I'm thinking, "Oh, yeah," just sort of breathing here and, "Oh, yeah, and how am I feeling in my
Yeah.
whole body?" Uh, and so I just wanted to talk about you often say, talk about the whole body and really getting information from the whole body. Can you speak a little to that?
Uh, yeah, so I think we are programmed to get information from our heads more. This is, we're in a time in the culture, I suppose, that where rational thought and ideas are primary, and we've been taught in schools that are, really just to think about the questions that come up for us. And yet we live in a body. We have a lot more information that comes through other channels, and in fact, 90% of what we communicate, both what we take in and what we communicate outwards, is nonverbal. So is body language. It's found in our tone of voice, but in the prosody of our voice, or in the micro expressions of our faces. And they're subtle, but we are actually better at reading things that way than we are with the facts in front of us. So and our body reads that. It's a physical thing, and we are inseparable really from that. And yet it's been kind of discounted until fairly recently with the avalanche of neuroscience research. It's really been showing that we maybe have our emphasis wrong, and it's starting to change in my world, and I think maybe out there in the wider world too, but in therapy circles for sure it is changing how we work.
Yeah, and what's the impact to the brain? Like, what happens in the brain when we actually are mindful and more aware and kind of, um, more embodied? What's going on in the brain?
Well, what happens is that you end up using more of your brain. And I remember I used to hear this all the time about how we only use 10% of our brain or something like that, and had this idea that somehow you could harness the whole brain. And well, I mean, it's not entirely true, but it is true that we a lot of our activities that are analytical are left brain dominant, and it's very integrative to try to use your whole brain, or because many of us are left brain dominant, to try to incorporate the right brain functions, which are they're more holistic and they're more emotional. They're where our attachment bonds come from, where they're processed. They're where we know how we feel about things. They access creativity. They're where we can really get the big picture. And so when we shift into our bodies or into any kind of creative process, we're using the side of our brain where I think we need to spend more time or live more, because it's actually I think that we are designed to more live from that holistic place. It makes us much more compassionate people and generally happier people if we can kind of include that bigger picture. It's really how we're meant to live, or how we're meant to be.
Yeah, and there's also some research around that and the impacts in lengthening telomeres in our body. Can you talk about that a little bit, or?
I'm not aware of that specific research. I am aware, that when you shift into the right brain, right hemisphere, and kind of take a more holistic stance, you increase your level of compassion, and it leads to a greater compassion for others. It kind of less self-focused, which is maybe paradoxical, but end up being just kind of more aware of the whole and your place in it, and that is uses a lot more of our integrative functions in our brain. So crossing the hemispheres and just using more of the capacity that we have to be human. They're human capacities that are fostered here, as opposed to abstract and analytical types of thoughts.
And then that makes so much sense, really, because then you think about attachment theory and also the sense of rising anxiety. Maybe that's because as we're becoming more bombarded, we really have to hone in some tools to be able to connect more and feel like we are part of a we or kind of connection. And so the more we practice these tools that you're going to give us, the more we can actually feel connected, and then the lowering of anxiety. And so, Leslie, I'm just wondering, could you take us through an exercise right now?
Yeah, sure. So this is a simple one, actually, that is the first step in focusing, as conceived by Eugene Gendlin, who would say that he didn't actually invent focusing. He would say that he more found it and found a way for people to access it. It's kind of a universal human capability. But the first step is really useful in its own right, and it has some research behind it that shows it reduces depression and brings a greater sense of well-being, especially in the face of stress. And I really think it's a great tool for overwhelm, or when you're just trying to clear the decks to do something, to concentrate or to focus on something. So we'll just start by clearing a space. So what I usually say is to everybody to start by just settling comfortably in your chair, or however you're sitting, and just notice the support underneath you, and actually bring your attention to your body. Just start with checking inside, and it's kind of noticing, your whole body, and particularly into your torso, which is where a lot of the felt senses we have come from. And just kind of say, ask yourself, well, how am I doing in here? And even that is a a useful thing. I can check in with myself and go, yeah, I'm good. I've got my dog in the corner there, and it's just a little anxiety provoking, but not too bad. And then what you do in this clearing of space after you kind of just checked in is ask, is there anything in between me and feeling just really good and present? And waiting. And usually what happens is something responds to that. So I'll just be quiet for a second. Just go, what's in the way of just feeling really good, really present right now? And really see what arises in your body, in your torso in particular. And it may be that you know what it's about, and it may be that you don't, but you're looking for a little bit of a physical sensation that comes. And then what we do in clearing a space is we just go, okay, we'll just spend a little time with that. Maybe it's, I have a dear family member who's ill, and that's with me. I can feel it, and so right now I don't want to focus on that. I want that to be, out of, just off to the side, it's really important to me. So I will think, well, what would I do, just to put this aside for now, and everybody does this a little differently. You can maybe imagine, some people like to imagine putting it in a box or on a shelf, or for each particular thing, putting it in the place where it would be happiest. And you have to feel your way yourself. But I would go, okay, I'm just going to tuck this away in a really comfortable place. And I can feel when I check back in that there's been a little bit of a shift. I feel a little bit lighter. It's not that it's gone, but it's just not here with me right now. And then you would do this again. You would go, okay, now check in. Anything more between me and feeling really good? And you might find another thing. And then just really think about where you might want to put that, just so it's outside of your immediate attention or awareness. Just take a minute to do that. Yeah. And then you can check back in, and I won't keep going, but what you can do is you can keep going until you feel like there's nothing in the way of feeling really good and present. And I just want you to notice in just that little bit that we did, um, has there been a shift? Do you feel a little bit, most people report feeling a little bit lighter, a little bit more space, a little able to take a deeper breath, and you can keep going down to sort of who you are without all your troubles. And a woman named Joan Clagsburn, who's a colleague of mine, has done this work with cancer patients who are dying. And even in those dire circumstances, they were able to find a sense of themselves apart from their illness, apart from their troubles, which were immense. So it can be a very powerful yet really simple tool.
Yeah, it just doing that with you right now. Wow, I do feel like an opening here, and just really kind of more of a kind of sense of flow,
Yeah.
and
Nice.
yeah, it's making me, it's reminding me of, my mom has got Alzheimer's, and yet she's such a delight to be around because she's so obviously in the present, every present moment. And it's a bit of a life lesson about just, like you say, clearing the space sometimes and just being in this one moment where everything is just here right now. And I also liked what you said before about, if there's things in the way, just sort of almost compassion for that. Just notice that, right? It's reminding me of Kristen Neff's work and her compassion research, and, just really clearing the space. And I think you've talked about there's 5 steps that you go through. Can you just explain those 5 steps for doing this, clearing the space?
Yeah. The 5 steps and focusing are something that Jen Lin developed. Well, first of all, I should tell you how he found focusing, which was Um, he was a philosophy student at the University of Chicago, and this was in the late 60s, early 70s. And then he also went on to do his training in psychology with Carl Rogers, who is known for his client-centered approach, very person-centered approach, and use of empathy. And what they did was they were looking at what would make psychotherapy effective, and wanting to find Carl Rogers was hoping that the unconditional positive regard would be the factor, and it is really a very helpful factor in therapy. But that isn't what they found was really the key. The key was something that they couldn't really quite define at first. They looked at thousands of sessions over 10 or 15 years. It was a massive a research study. And they used many different modalities and many different levels of skill of the therapist. And they found the one thing that they could identify that would really help the therapy process along was actually something the client was doing inside themselves. And it was apparent immediately. It didn't change over time with more therapy. And so they were trying to just kind of identify what are they doing. And they could tell by the language of the client that they were doing this, now called focusing, because it was kind of a tentative checking in the moment, as they were talking about something and not sure, and going back and checking into some internal reference, and then carrying on and having, the thing might even change as they were speaking. And that was the thing that differentiated the successful therapy patients from the others. And so I think Carl Rogers was maybe a little disappointed, but Jen thought, well, this is really interesting. Is this just something that people are gifted with, or can this be taught? Can it be broken down into steps? And so that's where the steps of focusing came from. And I still like them best, even though a lot of people have developed other methods. This is still kind of my favorite way of doing focusing. And it starts with clearing a space, the step that we just did. And then once the person feels clear and there's some room to work in there, no matter what, it kind of lets you clear away all the stressors of your life and the immediate concerns, so that you can get at what's really important to pay attention to in that particular moment. And then you ask for a felt sense of it. And you can either let your body decide, or you can pick a particular issue if you would like to, and just ask, what's the felt sense of that? You kind of get it, bring it to mind, but not too detailed away. And you don't go on and on about it. You just go, okay, I want to talk about my marriage, or I want to talk about my work, or whatever happens to be up for you. And your body will have a take on that. Your body will have a take on everything. It's really quite astounding, actually. And so you ask, and your body will give you sometimes a very subtle, it might start off with a very subtle kind of vague feeling that doesn't feel too promising. And yet that is actually often the way a felt sense starts. I think of it like a Polaroid, you use Polaroids, where you take a picture and it starts off and you can't see anything. And then gradually you start to see something take shape, and then it gets more and more clear with time. And so sometimes this process takes a little time. Our body's a bit slower at kind of bringing these things forward, and it needs our really kind of a compassionate, curious attention. But you'll get, everybody will get a felt sense through just asking in. And sometimes they're like a 2x4. They're a huge, immediate. Like some people will report, it feels like there's like a great big weight on my shoulder, or they really vary what kinds of felt senses people get. And sometimes they're subtle and sometimes not so subtle. But so the first step is just, asking.
Yeah, and the more you do that, I guess there's more intuition and more trust in making decisions, and sort of that, what we call the gut feel.
Yeah, it is accessing that gut feel. And I think a really good example of a felt sense that everybody can relate to is the feeling of having forgotten something. There's you're driving to the airport and you have a kind of a niggly feeling in your stomach, like, there's, and then you go through the possibilities. Is it my passport? Is it my jacket? Is it my, and you're looking and your body's telling you no, no, no. But then when you hit on what you forgot, there's a aha, you know, a shift. And that is like focusing, where you go, oh, your body knows, oh, it's my like toothbrush, and okay, I can buy another one, and then you carry on. But you know that's a mini focusing process. And so the felt sense is the first step, and then the second step actually, and then from there you try to name it. You try to find words for it. So they call it finding a handle and resonating. You find, well, how would I describe this thing? It's like a fuzzy ball. Is it you know, a rock in my belly? And you keep doing that till you find the right fit in the words, because that will help you refer back to it, and it gives you a sense of, oh, that's what it is. It helps you contain it. It helps you feel like you have a handle on it. And
yes. I
yes.
can sort of see that too, Leslie. Like if you, let's say you had, you know, some fuzzy ball, and you could actually be playful with it in a way which changes your perspective, like, oh no, you know, and to like, oh yeah, okay, so here's the fuzzy ball. So in a way you're being playful and lighter, even just in noticing it. And then and with that, then would you actually name it if you were with somebody and you had that kind of feeling of, gee, I don't know, you know, I'm tight here, or I feel, you know, a fuzzy ball. I might not say fuzzy ball to the other person, but
Yeah, the person themselves that I'm working with would name it. They would say, yeah, it's like a you know, a tornado in my chest, or it's like a you know, the images will come, sometimes memories, but and sometimes it will shift. But you know, lots of people will feel things like a tight knot in their belly. It's a really, but it's a very visceral. Every, and you can ask, once you have the name of it, you can ask, which is the next step, asking into it. You can ask, well, how long has it been there? And you know, people will say, oh, it's been there all my life, or it's been there since I was a kid. And it really, they get a sense of that they can have a dialogue with it, which is different from just feeling like you're the victim of it. You can kind of, you know, look at the, say it's a knot. A knot is a fairly common image actually for people that have anxiety. They'll have a knot in their belly, and people even use that metaphor. And then you can ask, and maybe ask, you know, what it's about, what it has to say. It's very general the way you ask in, because you're not wanting to kind of limit what the response would be. But usually just that, just simply paying attention and being curious and interested, will help loosen the knot. The first thing that people often say after they've just gone, oh, it's a knot, and you know, what's it like, and how is it in there? Just pay attention to it. They'll go, oh, it's starting to loosen a little bit, just with the attention and the acknowledgement that it's there. And so that that then leads to the final step. Once you've spent time, asking in is kind of the sort of core of the process, just having this dialogue with the felt sense. And it will evolve quite naturally. When you pay attention, it's like any kind of dialogue, like we're having it. You put something out, it answers back, and it just, this lovely flowing process often, where you get to a point where, oh, it just needs me to do this, or it will come to the person through the felt sense. I just need to take some time. I need to go walk in the woods. It will be a really authentic, visceral response to what they need. And when that happens, there's a shift, like a felt shift, like when you remember what you've forgotten, where you go, ah, okay. And then the final step is just to receive that, to actually take the time to really just let that in, because we can often skip over the point where we might go, oh, I got it, and then off, instead of just taking some time to go, yeah, that's different, and that's what I'll do, and write it down if you want, or feel like you can revisit it. So that's
and writing it down, and almost, you know, addressing, I guess too, as well, like giving permission for what you need in that. So there'd be something to do with, okay, I notice this, and what do I need right now that's going to help me, you know, feel good in my body, and of course then in more connection with the person that I'm with.
Yeah, it's really a lot of times, you know, when people have not really attended inside themselves like this, maybe ever, or just not that often, or don't take the time. The first thing that the felt sense will, sometimes it will take the form of something that's quite angry or doesn't want to talk to you, or might be look like, you know, it has maybe a disheveled kind of feeling about it, like, you know what, you've never listened to me all this time, and so, you know, and at first it might just take some negotiation to create a relationship where you go, yeah, no, I actually really am interested. And then it will open up and it will say, you know, well, really, most often it will say just that I need you to listen to me. I need you to pay attention. And that feels, you know, I think a lot of people, well, because it's not always comfortable, a felt sense, and people will avoid it if it's, you know, a knot in your belly. You think, well, why would I want to put my attention there? That's just going to make it worse. But it doesn't. And this has also been researched. It actually, anything that you put your direct attention on, especially if you put like a nice, compassionate, friendly attention that, you know, really is the way we encourage people to do in focusing, that it always dissipates, or almost always it dissipates immediately. There's an easing. It might not be the whole process, but it starts to feel better almost immediately, just putting your attention and acknowledging it's there. So
And there's something that's really normalizing about it too, to say, you know, of course I'm feeling this way, and it's normal to feel this way. And you know, would you actually take that to a conversation with the person that you're with to say, gee, I just noticed that when we're together lately, I feel, you know, whatever it is.
yeah, well, do you mean like in a therapy session or just in general life?
Generally in life, for people that are you know, when we're out and about and we're with somebody or something, or with our loved one, you know, that there might be something that our body is giving us information that then gets turned into a conversation.
Yeah, it's nice when you can do that. What needs to happen though, for that to take place, is that you need to be still, you need to have time. It needs to be kind of there. This process of checking inside doesn't take a lot of time, but I think it takes more time than we're used to spending with ourselves. You know, it might take, you know, 10 seconds, or it might take a minute. So it isn't really like in the normal flow of conversations, especially in our sped up world, as we've been saying. So where people expect really fast responses, or, you know, really, you know, it takes slowing down and more attention. But I find that, yeah, when I do that, and, you know, feel into the conversation, feel into my body as I'm with somebody, whether it's, you know, someone I love, or a client, or um, that it deepens the conversation so much, and really changes the trajectory of, I mean, I don't know, we probably all have, you know, kind of recurring conversations, or, you know, where the, you know, with my 16-year-old daughter, and the, can you please keep your room clean, and we go through around the same circle. And occasionally I'll do focusing with her, and it becomes so much better. It becomes about something larger, and there's a much more feeling of needing, and a feeling of working together on something, and more compassion. And so, yeah, it would be great if we actually brought it into the world. You know, there's a number of movements out there. Focusing is a worldwide organization, and they have a lot of people doing focusing with communities in war-torn countries in Afghanistan and Israel, where they're using it to teach people to communicate compassionately. And it's community-based. It's not really therapy-based. It's more of a grassroots sort of movement that's in keeping with Jenlin's idea that if we were all coming from this place, we could all just pause and check in before we spoke or before we acted. The whole world would be a different and better place. And so, you know, part of what the Focusing Institute's goal is not simply just as a therapy tool, but as something that is spread out in the world, and it's in pockets around the world. And I think it's true that it would make the world a better place if everybody did this.
And so, Leslie, when you wake up in the morning, do you go through a routine yourself every morning, or at lunch, or at the end of the day?
Not so formally. It's more for me a way that I just am at this point. I've been using focusing for how long? Like 20 years maybe. And so whenever I'm in a conversation or just feeling out of sorts or feeling something, I will just automatically stop, and I can feel into it. If I'm practiced at it, so it happens pretty quickly, and I can just kind of sense it. And sometimes things need more time, and I will, might have to set it aside and go, yeah, okay, I will spend time with you later, and really go into what it's about. It works better with another person, though. It's really much easier to move the process through with another person. And so I do sometimes do focusing in partnership, just with someone else who basically just listens, and reflects. There's no really dramatic skill it takes. It's just a way of listening deeply to somebody that moves the process forward in a way that brings more than if you were just doing it yourself. I mean, it is something you can do on your own, but Jelen says it's because we're inherently relational, and that when we're sitting with somebody, we have this, our bodies and their bodies are picking up and giving off more information than we're both aware of. And so there's a way that when I'm doing that, the person's responding not to just my words, but all that other stuff, which I'm not even really aware of sending, and they're giving it back. And so there's this dialogue that happens that really brings in a lot more information and flow than if you are doing it just with yourself. It doesn't mean that you can't do it just with yourself, but that it is just better with someone else, like a lot of things. Yeah.
And, I think about, in the schools, we've got this Mind Up program, but I think Focus and it's great. It's kind of working almost as our kids are learning these tools, and they're teaching us as parents, and so I could see focusing might be really great for us to do with our children.
Yes, there is actually an international association for focusing for children specifically, and they have an annual conference, and they do. I think they do some research, mostly that their mission is to get focusing into the schools, and there is Focusing Institute was based in New York, and they have a program for inner city schools teaching focusing to those kids. And from what I've heard, the results of it have been really tremendous. I'm not well aware of the details, but I think it really teaches the kids to listen to themselves, and it teaches them when you can listen to yourself with empathy, then you're much more empathic with others as well. And it's really wonderful with children. I do use focusing with my daughter sometimes. I start mostly, I mean, she's a teenager now, so she goes in and out of being open to doing that. But when she was very little, I remember one time she was really upset about something. And so I said, well, why don't you just see if there's something in your body that, place it, it lives, and what is it like? And she could find it, and she talked about it, and I noticed with kids the focusing process goes very quickly, but it's pretty natural for them to do, and it just helped. I mean, whatever she was afraid of, that it dissipated. And when she was upset again another time, she said, "Can we do that thing that you did? I'd like to do that again." And really, I think kids, it's a pretty natural thing for them to do. I think it's a pretty natural thing for people in general to do. It's just that we don't know.
So kind of noticing it and then setting it aside. And I love that. One of the things that I notice with clients is that sometimes, and with myself and others, that we're harsh critics of ourselves. Sometimes judgments can come up about doing a great job, being enough, and all of those things. And I see noticing the emotional impact that those kind of judgments have on our bodies, and how we could actually set judgment aside. Or can you talk about that, the blocks that can come for people, because it does block our connection And it stops us from being in healthy relationship with our bodies, with ourselves, with our spirit, and with others. So can you speak to that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There is a lot of information and kind of tools for working with the inner critic, is what they call this in focusing. And the inner critic is a universal human experience. It was first identified as the superego by Freud. But I'm sure everybody can relate to the idea of this inner critic that's always down on us about you're not smart enough, or beautiful enough, or whatever happens to be our particular critic's theme song. And focusing can really help with that. There's a number of ways. So the first thing is, like everything in focusing, is just to stop, and rather than really take those words, which are typically very harsh. I think when the way people speak to themselves is harsher than they would ever be with anybody else. And it seems like the critic is like this amalgamation of when your parents were the most angry, and all the authority figures that berated you, and they kind of rolled into one, and those that comes at you from the inside. And everyone experiences it, to varying degrees. And I know people who've had very traumatic backgrounds or suffering from depression, their inner critic gets very loud. And so the first thing is this kind of to step back from it and listen, listen with in a different stance. So you listen to it not as though it's actually true, that the content of what the critic says, if you notice it, it's usually very one-dimensional and repetitive, and it's really something you can have a dialogue with, like anything. If you sort of welcome the conversation rather than just either accept it or try to ignore it, to say, okay, well, what's the felt sense of this? What is the critic? I mean, there's many ways around it. You don't want to necessarily dive right into it, but you want to go, what is it trying to say, or what's its intention, or the feeling around it? And usually what you'll find is that it's protective. It's really trying to save us from, if we're, say, terrified to move forward in our lives, it might be trying to protect us from failure, or if people have had, say, history of difficult relationships, it might be, really critical of that process to prevent us from being hurt. But what it tends to do is really not update with time. And so, you can get a felt sense of this critical place, and where it's coming from, that it actually has, good intentions, but it's fear-based, and that you can have this dialogue with it and go, well, things have changed. I've changed. I'm not the little kid that's going to make that rash decision, or I'm a bigger person now. I'm capable of being in a relationship. I know there's the potential to be hurt, but I'm much older and wiser, and much more able to handle what comes. Or it's like you need to have a dialogue and update it. That fear it's there for good reason, and thank you for trying to protect me or make me a better person. I think if you look at the intention, it's usually some kind of self-improvement behind it. It's just that its message is delivered in such a harsh way that it just makes us feel bad. But it doesn't have to be that way. And I've actually noticed, working with my own inner critic and with other people, that I almost never hear it anymore. It's really, really very dim voice, and it's something that I pay attention to in a different way, like, oh, maybe that's, what's it telling me to do in a more positive way, or what's the fear around this that I'm about to do? And, it might lead you to things that happened in your life that brought it into existence and makes it so strong. And really, the more adversity someone's had, the stronger this voice can be. So understanding that connection, I think, is really helpful.
Yeah, and I loved when you were doing that, you were kind of rubbing your chest here, and just actually showing us right now that sense of being able to self-soothe and self-regulate and normalize and just kind of almost soothing, the feelings that you're having, being good to
Yeah.
yourself, right?
Yeah, it is. I think
Mhm.
most of the critical voices in our heads come from when we were very young. They start in early childhood, and so I think that part of us is, it needs nurturing, and I have a theory about why it's there, and I think a lot of times what happens is, kids. They're really dependent on the attachment in their early environment, and so when something is wrong in that environment, they really cannot comfortably say that the problem resides in their environment, because they need it, and so they will instead take it on themselves and go, well, if there's something wrong, it must be wrong with me. That's generally what kids do. And the worse the environment is that they're in, the worse their relationships, the more likely it is that they'll really feel like, oh, it must be really bad to have this be happening, because that way they don't feel like their security or the world they live in is a dangerous place. It's easier to take it in, but then what happens is that without some kind of a dialogue or an updating of this, it kind of stays with us through our lives. And people come with a sense of feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with me, when really there isn't.
Mm.
And so this really looking at the critic and where it came from, and how to how to update it really helps kind of eliminate that feeling of I'm wrong or I'm bad, or and so many people carry this underlying feeling of inadequacy. It's really can really detract from you just living your life fully, I think. So it's important to address. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's the more we're kind of focused inside ourselves and sort of realizing that there are tools that we can turn to help soothe, the more we're able to deal with then stressful situations. And so I'm thinking how this would be really helpful for people that are working in a kind of hectic workplace, or under a lot of pressure. Maybe they're interning in something, or under a steep learning curve in a new job, or that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about that? What would you say to a client that says, oh, Leslie, I really just need to know how I can actually go into this new experience with more capacity?
Hmm. Yeah. Well. Yeah. That's a kind of a large question.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to imagine, because it's generic. But what I would say is, um, that having compassion for yourself in new situations is really helpful in allowing you to be a beginner and to learn. Nobody expects you in a brand new situation to have it all figured out, and yet I think we can put that expectation on ourselves that we have to have it all together, and we have to know it all before we start. And really understanding that you're human, and you probably make mistakes, and that's how you learn, and that it's okay. There's I think previously self-esteem was considered a really good sign of a good mental health, to feel really good about yourself, and that was kind of one of our goals, was to cultivate self-esteem, and that's now being replaced by self-compassion, because the problem with self-esteem is it's not as connected with other, and it can tend to, if taken to extreme, it can make you more grandiose and a little bit competitive, and having to strive and be the best in a way that's starts to maybe become pressure, another form of pressure. And where self-compassion says that we're all human beings, we're all in this together, we all make mistakes, and we all rise above, or we learn from it, and it's just a much more comforting a way of being with oneself, and it's really been found to lead to much greater happiness than self-esteem. So it's kind of been updated to think, really about what how to be kind to yourself in these situations. And think about how you would be with someone else in that situation. What would you say to your best friend if they were at a new job? Well, try treating yourself the same way as you would your best friend, and soften a little bit your expectations.
I love that word soften, and just the ease that we want, all of us want in our lives, and that it's always got to start within ourselves and just being in a practice of those 5 steps. So can you just go over them one more time then, the 5 steps for focusing?
Yes. So I'll say a little about each one, starting with clearing a space, which is something that we practiced a little bit and is really about checking in with yourself and setting aside all of the noise and all of the distraction just so that you can be with yourself. And it's a useful stress relieving exercise in its own right. It's a really a great way to start any kind of project. If you're really feeling overwhelmed or you've got a lot on your mind and you really want to focus on the person you're with or the task at hand, you go in and just set aside all of the different things that are weighing on you. And they may be very real and very big things, but just for now, I'm just going to put this over here and put this over here until you get a sense of, okay, I've got some breathing room. I can be.
It's important. The bells are ringing. Clearing the space is really important.
My computer. So, and then the next step is finding a felt sense. So once you cleared a space, then you find this sort of wide open. You do a wide open inquiry into your body and go, okay, what's needing my attention? Or if you have a particular issue, you go, well, what's the felt sense of that? And you get a real time take. This is really important. This point is that you get a real time take with a felt sense of how you feel right in that moment about something. And I think we kind of always assume that we know how we feel, but taking the time to go check in, say, about an issue that's weighing on you, you might actually find in this moment, hey, I'm actually not feeling too badly about that, or oh, it's actually this aspect of it that's important, not that one. So, and your body will have a very nuanced, intricate take of virtually everything that's in your life. So if you take a moment to check in and find a felt sense, it will be very nuanced, interesting, complex sense of it that leads somewhere. When you pay attention to it, it leads somewhere. It has a forward, what Jen Lin would call life forward momentum. It aligns with our, just our natural organic process of growth. It's very very positive, forward moving in a really basic way. So once you have, the physical feeling of that, then there's the process of finding the words for it and really checking back in with your body to see that you found just the right words. Jen Lin called this handle and resonate, which is kind of a weird way to say it, but that process of going back and forth, checking in, finding the words, that's a really integrative process. It uses both sides of your brain. It really helps you kind of delineate what the issue is. You get an image for it. You get a name for it. It really contains it. Then you go, oh, okay. Then this whole business is really just like it's like a rock, or it's like a mountain, or it's like and you then have a way, because you have an image, a sense of it, to dialogue with it, as opposed to feeling like you're immersed in it or you're a victim of it. You have this, you've created a little space, and you can actually go back and forth with it. And, you can handle a lot of very big things in a more comfortable way by having this particular kind of dialogue and staying in yourself very interested and compassionate and curious. So that next step after finding a handle and resonating is just to ask, just to be curious, have a conversation, find out what its story is. Really listen to this part of your body that has something to say, and it will often surprise you. And when it comes, when it's not like the answer, but when your sense of what it's all about comes to you in a way that kind of lands, you'll feel it in your body. There'll be a a felt shift is what Gemma would call it, but just an easing, just an aha moment, like when you remember what you forgot. It's like, your whole body will just kind of relax a little, and something will be easier. And the way you are in that situation then will be easier. And then the final step is the receiving, where you just actually take time to take it in. And sometimes I will ask people, do you remember the steps that you took to get to this place? Maybe you could just, rehearse those so that you could find it again if you wanted to. And take the time to be grateful for what your body's told you. So that's the gist of the process.
Good, thank you, Leslie. And I just we've got a couple questions actually. Maybe I think we've got time to take one of them, and one of them is from Mike, and he says, "I'm a songwriter, and sometimes I feel really blocked, and my creativity won't come. What steps can I take to get back into my creative zone?"
Wow, that's a good question. So I think probably the best way to spur that creativity is to actually not be so focused on the goal, because when you're goal focused, you end up kind of switching to more a left hemisphere dominant process of wanting to find out something, and it accesses only the things that you already know. So it isn't where new information comes from. And so stepping back and having a much more holistic perspective will allow things to percolate that are new. And I would say, if you're having trouble writing a song, don't sit down and go, I'm going to write that song. Actually go for a walk, let your mind wander. Maybe you want to gather up the themes and kind of have them playing in your mind, but then don't try so hard to find the particular words, but just do something completely different and allow the process to come, because it's the creative process actually does not work under like a direction. It actually needs that kind of space to allow the new connections to arise. They come when we're kind of not trying, basically.
Great. And so thank you, Leslie. And I just wanted to say, if somebody wants to get a hold of you, how do they get a hold of you to make that connection?
Oh, probably the simplest thing would be to send me an email. And I've got all kinds of resources that I can point you to as well about everything that I've talked about. My email is lae@telus.net. And I'm happy to answer any of your questions or talk more about this with anybody who's interested.
Great. I just want to thank you so much for all this information and helping us be in better connection with our bodies, and therefore better relationships that will follow from that at work, at home. And it's just one more step as we're moving through this journey to help you have really good energy this year so that you can shine in 2016. I also wanted to say thank you as well to the work that that Dress for Success Vancouver is doing for the not-for-profit Dress for Success, and that when you buy this series, the archive, you actually are supporting Dress for Success Vancouver, which helps women get ahead in their starting new jobs and live sustainably in their lives. And so here we are at week 2, just to remind you that I'm hoping you're journaling at least 1 or 2 things from each of the sessions that we have as you move through this journey, so that you've got things to reference all the way along. Last week, we talked about nutrition and how you can really be in better partnership with your body. Today, learning really from Leslie how we can be in better partnership with our body from a psychological point of view, working with our nervous system and helping self-regulate and be at ease and in that softening about ourselves in our lives. And coming up next week, we'll have Mandy King from HEAL, and she'll be talking about how we work with our families and our partners and in our life to manage our meals and get efficient and good ways to plan better. So meal planning and that kind of thing. She's just terrific, full of great information, and I'll look forward to welcoming her next week. Once again, I want to thank all of the speakers that we've got right along the way through these 10 weeks. They're all volunteering their time. And again, thanks so much today, Leslie. That was wonderful. And I'm Joanne Weiler, and you can reach me at my email at jojo with an E at the end at telus.net. If you have quick questions for our speakers, please feel free to send them along, and we'll make sure we get to them. Thanks so much. Have a great week. Shine on.